Welcome, everyone. I'm Sherry Caulfield, and I am so excited to be here today for an interview series I'm calling If I've Only Known. And today I have with me Amy Collette, who is an amazing coach, book publisher, and I'm going to let her tell you more about herself. So Amy, welcome, welcome, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about you and your business?
Thank you, Sherry. It's so great to be here with you today. So I'm Amy Collette. I'm in the Colorado area, and my business is called Positively Powered. My coaching program is called Unleash Your Inner Author. So what I do in that business is I help speakers and entrepreneurs, people with big ideas. I help them amplify their impact by becoming best-selling authors of their own
Amazing.
books.
And
And you can see some of
everybody
those
has a book
behind
in
me.
them, right? Yeah, everybody has a book in them.
Almost everyone has a book in them. I've met a few people who say, I just really wouldn't ever want to write a book, but a few of those have written books anyway.
I love it. I love it. Very cool. Well, I know as an author and a publisher, books obviously are always about stories. And I know you talk a lot about storytelling in your business. So tell us why you believe that storytelling is so important.
Yeah. Sherry, I always knew that storytelling obviously is important in books, right? But over the years that I've been doing this, I realized that storytelling is just absolutely essential in business because it's the way people connect. It's the way people get to know each other. Like when you and I first got on a call, we shared some stories, and we might not think of them as long drawn out stories, but where are you from and what's your background and how did you get so passionate about what you do? That's where people connect and they go, okay, I get you. I see you. And I can see something similar in myself. So I know that we can communicate, we can connect, and feel comfortable with each other. So that's how it starts. And there's no difference
that's
in
so
business.
True. Yeah, and that's so important. And I totally get that. It's that building relationship that is the number one thing that we get to do as business owners is build relationship. So tell me a little bit about, as a business owner, how do we decide what kinds of stories we should tell?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and it's been an evolution for me realizing this because I used to tell this story about my background, like why should you take me seriously as a book coach and publisher, right? And I'd say, well, I come from this background as a professional writer, a professional editor for years. I have all this, kind of telling my resume, right? Well, okay, so that's great. You get to know my credibility, but it's not very personal. You don't get to know why I'm so passionate about helping people write their books, right? So then I started telling more stories about that, about why I'm so passionate. And one of them is a story about why I wrote my first book, The Gratitude Connection. I definitely had the skills in the background to write a book, but I went through an experience that was really hard. And I went through a tough time and was finding it difficult to get out of that tough time, and kind of come back to life. And so the book is my story about that. And then along with that, another story that goes perfectly along with that is that when I first published my book, the first edition of the book, I published it with a publisher. And when I got the book, I wasn't happy with it. It didn't feel like my book. They had taken my book and done something different with it than what my vision was. So I had to put together my own team and, re-edit it, redesign it, republish it. And it's a different size and everything, different colors. It looks totally different. But now it's my book, So I want that experience for every new author so that they just burst into tears when they first
that's
their
beautiful.
book, right?
And I haven't published a book, but I just have to imagine that holding that first copy of your book in your hands just has to be an amazing experience. And I totally get what you're talking about in terms of the personal stories. My experience, I think that several years ago, I made the decision to start traveling full time and take my business with me. And it's amazing to me when I'm speaking or when I'm doing a webinar, whatever it might be, I tell my story about what I call my knock upside the head moment, when I realized that I'd built a business that was stopping me from doing what I wanted to do, what I call my bucket list. And when I tell that story, it brings it to life for people, how important it is to live their best life. And that sounds like a cliche. I don't mean it to be, but I call it live your bucket list now and take your business with you. But
Yeah.
it's my story that helps people realize it's possible for them. And I think that aspirational part of it is so important, similar to what you're talking about in terms of writing your first book. Love that. Love that.
Yes.
So how do we know, a lot of things we do in business, we have these measurable results. How do we know the impact of sharing stories with the people that we come into contact with?
Yeah, I think you really feel that impact when you're building a relationship, right? Because you have that more, instead of just it being a kind of a generic trading information kind of relationship, it's more personal.
Yeah.
And in my business, I get pretty personal with the people I work with. They've got to know that they can trust me, and I've got to know, and every business person needs to know that potential client that you're talking to is a good fit.
Right.
That you can actually help them build their dreams and make their dreams come alive, right? And so you've got to get a little nitty gritty, I think, to really find that out and say, yes, we are a good match. We have some chemistry. I think we can work together and communicate well and really be vulnerable. And if we're here to make a difference, I think that willingness to be vulnerable is super important, right? So it shows in that relationship. And I call it instead of ROI, return on investment, I call it ROEI. It's a return on emotional investment. So you're putting a little bit of yourself in there, right? In that relationship and asking for that same kind of openness on their part. And so
when you're willing to give, then they're willing to give back to you.
Exactly. When you model it, then it opens the door and they go, oh, okay, I get it. I can do this.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I hear you on the vulnerability. I did some leadership training years ago. And one of the quotes that's just stuck with me is vulnerability is your biggest asset. And that's always stuck with me. So I totally get what you're saying about it's our willingness to be vulnerable that allows us to deepen the relationship. Right. Very cool. So we've been talking about us telling people stories as it relates to our lives and our business. If we're willing to tell stories, what should we be looking for to have others tell us stories?
I think you have to ask.
Yeah.
I think that's another aspect of it. You can model it and show, share your stories first. I often do that. I say, I'm going to ask you to get personal with me. So I'm going to take that first step and share something with you first. I just am very upfront about it. And then I say, okay, it's your turn. And you can share whatever you like with me. But I usually am asking for what I call that origin story. So I want to know the background. I want to know how you got here. Like your story is fascinating, Sherry, about how you want to travel. And it's such a passion of yours. That really helps me understand you and get to know you. So if I can ask somebody, how'd you get here? Right. What was your winding path? Really, I want to know. And that opens the door even wider so that they can walk through and feel comfortable sharing what's real for them.
Yeah. And I'm sure this is true for you. I find if I'm just curious about people, curious is my favorite word. And if I go to any conversation, whether it's meeting somebody at a dinner party or it's an enrollment conversation for somebody to get into one of my programs, if I'm just curious and ask them questions, it's amazing the things that you can learn about someone and where those connections might cross. And that's where the juice is, right? You mentioned earlier about people want to get to know us certainly before they're going to buy from us. And just get curious.
Yeah, I love that because that really is what's behind everything. And it takes you in any conversation, it takes you out of yourself. If you're nervous or you're a little worried about how this
Right.
is going to go, being curious about that other person just takes all that away, because the focus isn't on you, then it's on them. And
Right.
you're really caring about them, showing them
Mhm.
some love and kindness, and building that know, like,
Yeah.
and trust relationship.
Right. And I think for anybody that's nervous about having those conversations, if they remember that if you focus on the other person, it takes that pressure off and it makes that conversation a whole lot easier.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah,
it
very cool.
naturally leads to stories.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, do you have any tips for how do we know what are the best stories for us to tell about ourselves? And as it relates to our business, I guess, for the most part in this context.
Yeah, I think you still always want to keep the focus on whoever you're talking to. So it really depends on what you're doing with that
Mhm,
person,
mhm,
and I don't encourage oversharing.
mhm.
You
Right,
don't want to
right.
get
Yeah,
way
there's
too
a line.
personal. You don't want to get too personal on the first date, right?
Right, right.
So you've got to use some discernment about that. But, I shared a personal story with a client of mine who's writing a book about storytelling. And I just wanted to learn to tell the story better. And so I shared it with him and asked him for his feedback. And he said, Amy, you ought to be telling that story to every prospective person that you talk to, because it's some transformation
Mhm,
on my side, which
mhm.
is what really all our books are about.
Right.
Everything we talk about is someone's transformation, and how how their readers can bring that same kind of transformation into their own lives.
Right.
So he said that was important. I got that great advice, that it was important for me to share stories about my own transformation, and
Yeah.
why I'm so
Mhm.
passionate about that topic. So that was
Yeah.
great advice, and I'll give that same advice
Mhm,
to everybody else. Make it relevant to the person that you're talking to.
mhm. Yeah, that's true. And do you have any tips or tricks for how people should collect their own stories for
Oh,
those different situations, if you will? I mean, like for instance, I know at times I've actually had a Word document where I have collected kind of ideas for
yes.
stories that would relate to different things. Is there anything in particular you do?
Yes, I actually teach a whole workshop on this, but
Oh, cool. I love
it,
it.
yeah, it's based on a book called Stories That Stick
Ah, okay.
by Kendra Hall.
Okay.
And she recommends there's different ways to sort of build this story collection.
Hmm.
And you can write like decades of your life and
Hmm.
significant events that
Hmm.
happen. And, it's just a brainstorming exercise.
Sure, sure.
So you write down all the significant events that you can remember that happened in that decade. And then at another time, take a look at those and see what
Mhm.
stories bubble up that might be relevant to your
Ah,
business, to your
right.
customers, to your clients,
Mhm.
to your book. And
Right. I
so
love it.
another way to do it is by compiling things like where you lived, places that you lived. So
Mhm.
different stories come up when you think about, when I lived in England,
Mhm. Mhm.
I remember these things, or when
Right.
we moved to Wisconsin,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. So people in your life, significant relationships, places,
Mhm.
um, types of things like sports, if you're into sports or
Mhm.
arts or whatever, significant things about those. And that's just a great brainstorming idea to
Yeah.
just get those juices flowing and help you remember some of your stories that you might
Mhm.
have forgotten, or that you don't choose to share because it
Mhm.
just doesn't seem relevant. But the more you look at the stories that you have, it teaches you about yourself,
Right.
and then you can share that with others as you see fit.
Mhm. Very cool. Very cool. Well, Amy, I know you have a free gift that you'd like to share. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So it's called The Power of Your Unique Story. So sometimes people, and this goes to just what we were talking about, having all these stories, all of us have way more content in our brains than we could ever really use, you know? So this kind of helps you dial in what stories you should be telling. And it helps you understand how your passions, your perspective lead to the kind of impact that you want to make. So as a business person, as just a human, as a speaker, as a writer, whatever you're doing as a coach, you can learn something about yourself and maybe see how these different things have led to where you are now and where you want it to take you in the future. So whether you want to write a book or not, I think this workbook is very useful and helpful.
Very cool. I love that. So the link to get that free gift is going to be either in the show notes below here or in the comments if you're viewing this on social media. So make sure you grab that because it sounds like it's an invaluable tool for capturing those stories and knowing which ones you have right at the right time you need it. Yeah. Very cool. So Amy, how should people contact you if they want to get in touch with you?
You can always find me on my website, which is unleashyourinnerauthor.com. And there's a place there in the contact page to get in touch with me. I'd be happy to have a conversation with anybody who's excited about stories and storytelling in their own business. And I love it. I'm on all the social media too, so you can find me under Amy Collette or Unleash Your Inner Author.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to close with a question that I'm asking everyone in this interview series, and would just love your thoughts on this. So I want you to think back, if you had known everything you know today when you started your business, what would you tell your new entrepreneur self?
Yeah, Sherry, that's such a great question. And two things come to mind. So the first one is I'd tell my younger self to just relax. It's going to be okay. I think we all worry too much and stress out rather than just follow the crazy path that we take to get where we're going. The other one I think is just more practical, and it's straight out of Stephen Covey. And that's start with the end in mind. So I think so often as business people, especially when we're starting out, we can just be scrambling, worried about what's going to happen tomorrow and where's the next client going to come from and how's my business going to survive.
Right.
I think having that long-term thinking about where do I want to be? How do I want to serve? What do I want my business to look like in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years? And really understand how that might feel and what that looks like, because then you can work backward from that and be more conscious about how you're building your business rather than just, going 90 miles an hour and not getting anywhere early on.
Great advice. I love both of those tips. Well, Amy, it's been a pleasure to get to know you a little bit more and learn more about how we can really unleash our inner author. And I appreciate your being here today. For those of you listening, don't forget to check the show notes or the comments to get the link to Amy's free gift, and go out there and share your story. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you so much, Sherry. It's been a delight to be with you.